So I can tell you at 8:30 in the morning here in Israel, wherever you're watching or listening to us, that the ceasefire appears to have been delayed. The ceasefire that was supposed to go into force right now in Gaza, ending 15 months of fighting. This latest conflict of this chapter, of course, which started on the 7th of October, where more than 1,200 people were murdered here in Israel by Hamas militants and Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants who came out of Gaza and took hostages. And then, of course, that bitter war which followed. The Hamas-run health ministry saying that more than 46,000 people in Gaza have lost their lives in the last 470 days or so. There has been a very complex and very difficult ceasefire agreement which has taken months to actually put into effect. Joe Biden, the outgoing US president, said it's very much based on the framework that he put forward in May of last year and is only now in January of the following year supposed to be coming into effect. But the breaking news that I can bring you as you're joining us here this morning live in Israel is that ceasefire appears to have been delayed. We're waiting to hear from the Israel Defense Forces. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said that they would be instructed not to begin this ceasefire if the list had not been provided by Hamas. Hamas has said just in the last few minutes that it has reaffirmed its commitment to the terms of the ceasefire. They say that the delay in providing the names of those due to be released in the first batch is due to technical field reasons. So now it is again an incredibly difficult moment. Even as this ceasefire agreement was supposed to be happening, it has already been delayed. Let's bring in our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Lise, we should say first of all, since you and I came here and covered the beginning of this story 470 days ago, it has been a time of extraordinary suffering for Israelis and for Palestinians, and so many people on both sides were desperate for this moment, desperate for this ceasefire agreement to begin successfully.
Yes, Anna, perhaps these last-minute hitches, these delays, which hopefully will be limited, are not surprising given the complexity of this deal, given the devastation on the ground in Gaza, which we've been able to report about, even though international journalists are still not allowed to go there to report independently. Palestinian colleagues have been doing that. But even though they may not be surprising, they are agonizing. As we know, it's often these last minutes before something momentous is about to happen that can seem like hours, that can seem like days. The people of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians, the families of the loved ones held hostage in Gaza have lived through a nightmare in the last 15 months. And they were daring to hope that this time, unlike in November, where, as you remember, you covered it as well, the temporary truce broke down very quickly after more than about 100 hostages were released in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There was a moment of calm, a blissful calm. This time they're hoping that this will be not just a long and sustainable ceasefire. The sustainable calm, that's the term that is used in the deal that was signed after months and months of protracted negotiations. But they want an end to this war. But for the moment, Anna, we are focusing on this waiting for it to start, for that moment where they can believe that something good will come out of this deal. But as you've been reporting, while there is cautious hope, this moment is also fraught with risk that it will so quickly unravel. And it across Israel, across Palestinian territory, capitals across this region and around the world, they're waiting with bated breath, hoping that this deal will hold, except, of course, for the critics of this deal, the spoilers. And they are many. There are many who want to believe that after the first phase that this will all fall apart, including the far right-wing members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet.
Yeah, we heard, didn't we, yesterday, Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the key far-right members of that coalition, taking his Jewish Power Party out of the coalition. As you say, there's been a lot of objections to that deal here in Israel. We are hearing, Lise, from Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who we've heard from many times before from the Israel Defense Forces. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu had instructed them not to begin the ceasefire if that list had not been handed across. Hamas said that they were committed to the ceasefire, that it was technical reasons that had delayed that handover. But Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari confirming that the ceasefire has not taken effect. As long as Hamas says it's not meeting its obligations, it won't take effect. And in particular, the need to hand over that list of hostages, 33 of them who are supposed to be handed over in that first phase. So Lise, as we're looking at live pictures here of the skyline of Gaza, that sort of view that we're very familiar with looking from southern Israel across to Gaza, you were reflecting, Lise, on the complexity of that deal, the amount of time that it's taken to actually get to this point, the number of conditions that exist within it. What will be happening now as they try and resolve this? Because it stumbled, as you say, at the very first hurdle.
Well, this phrase that is used by Hamas, technical field difficulties, this is something which has plagued the negotiations for a very long time. Israel used to accuse Hamas of playing tricks, of trying to deceive them, because they couldn't actually say how many hostages were alive, how many hostages were dead, because in that scramble, in that there was atrocious hours, horrific attacks by Hamas at dawn on October the 7th, 2023. It wasn't just Hamas that grabbed hostages. It was soldiers and civilians, including babies, infants, and very dashing across the border to Gaza with them. There was also the Islamic Jihad group and also civilians from Gaza who just basically seized this opportunity. And so throughout the past 15 months, Hamas has been trying to, in the midst of this blistering war, has been trying to find out where the hostages are, how difficult it will be to get access to them, are they alive? And obviously there's been much more clarity as these negotiations came to the final point, those last days where they said they were almost there. They came up with this list of 33. On this list, as we've been reporting, this is children, women, female soldiers, possibly men under the age of 40. The male soldiers will be left to the final stages. And it had seemed that they did know, although they didn't make clear on this list who is alive and who is dead. And this has just magnified the agony for the families of the hostages who are desperate, who've lived without any information except for these horrible videos, these proof of life videos that have sometimes emerged from Hamas. We can only speculate now, Anna. Is it because they can't get access to certain areas? Is the handover from one group to another not proceeding? Have they not reached the point? Obviously, Hamas also is doing this, worried about their own safety. They have to emerge from the shadows. We do know, though, that they do get help in these, the International Committee of the Red Cross, local organizations. Everyone is poised, and we can only hope, Anna, that this is just a matter of moment, just some last hitches. There's nothing to suggest that it is anything more than that.
Lise, do stay with us. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, there. I want to take you to the occupied West Bank. John Donnison is there. John, how is this delay being received by Palestinians where you are?
Well, it's an agonising wait, because what the Palestinian Prisoners Association is saying here is that they still don't have a concrete list of names of the 90 or so Palestinian prisoners who are expected to be freed today. So you still have families waiting if their loved ones are going to be coming out of prison. And for those prisoners, I mean, Palestinians regard them as hostages, as bargaining chips being held by Israel in the same way that Israel regards the people being held by Hamas as hostages. So, you know, they are going to be waiting all day, and we still don't really have any clarity of how this process is going to work today, how they're going to be brought out of prison, where they're going to be taken to. Some are going to be deported out of Israel-Palestine to neighbouring countries, to Turkey, to Qatar. Some are going to be deported back to Gaza. So, yes, like everywhere, people are still waiting. And, you know, the thing that is just so tragic, really, is that it seems right up to this ceasefire hopefully coming into effect, people are probably still dying. We've seen those airstrikes in Gaza this morning. Certainly in the last few days, there have been scores of people killed in Gaza in Israeli strikes. And with some sort of calm in sight, those people are not going to see it.
John, thank you. John Donnison, our correspondent there, just showing you some live images that we're seeing as well from Khan Yunis in Gaza. People there obviously coming together, getting news of the delay. If you're just joining us this morning on BBC Breakfast, the BBC News Channel or BBC 5 Live, wherever you're watching or listening, we're bringing you the breaking news this morning that ceasefire has not gone into effect as expected. You can hear there the sound of car horns in Khan Yunis in Gaza. Israel says that it has not received, as it was supposed to under the terms of this deal, a definitive list of those 33 hostages who are due to be released in the next 42 days or so. They say until that comes, that this ceasefire will not begin and that the fighting will continue in Gaza. Of course, many people here in Israel and in Gaza have been desperate for this moment. And I want to bring in Gil Dickman. Gil, I remember the last time there was a ceasefire, more than a year ago now. You and I, we stood here in this same square in Tel Aviv. You, better than anybody, understand what this moment is like for those families who are still waiting for their loved ones.
Yeah, I know how emotionally tense it is. It's like a roller coaster because you know you're expecting something good. You know you might see your loved one in just a few hours, but everything is at stake because it could all collapse in just one moment. And we see it with this delay. We know that the next few days are going to be a nightmare for all of us, but it is going to end. And that's another reason why we have to start with it as quickly as possible. Hamas should have given the list already. Give the list. Let's start the negotiation for the next phases of the deal and finish with it as quickly as possible, because it's going to be a nightmare for all of us if we don't.
At moments like this, just share how emotional it is. I mean, I can see from looking at you, and I know from conversations I've had with you here before, how emotional these moments are, particularly for those families who are expecting their loved ones to be in this part of the deal. These moments are agonizing. Yeah.
On the one hand, you think, oh my God, she might be coming in just a few hours. You start to think about what you're going to get for her. You start, packing the luggage for the moment she's here. And on the other hand, you keep remembering that it all might collapse in just one moment. And that's really agonizing, as you said. For all of us, it is bittersweet here today because it's good to see this ceasefire finally on the way, but it's too late already. It's too late already for Carmel, who was supposed to be on the list for this very, very ceasefire, for this very deal. And it's too late for all the hostages here that are still there, actually, because it doesn't matter even who comes out today. There have been 471 days in captivity. That's way, way too long, and I don't want to start thinking about what they've been through there. That's all in our minds as families of hostages. That's definitely in the minds of the families who are awaiting family members. But the most important thing is that we start, because we want this war to end. And what I'm afraid of is that this is only a temporary ceasefire, that we'll see only 33 hostages coming and then the war will resume. This is not what we want. We want this ceasefire to start as quickly as possible and then to end this war completely with all 97 hostages coming back home. We had one hostage that was right now rescued from Gaza, the body of a hostage, actually Oron Shaul, that's been there for 10 years. 3 more hostages have been in Gaza for 10 years. We have to get this over with.
Gil, thank you for joining us, Gil Dickman. I really appreciate it. And I think you speak for many, many people, not just here in Israel, but in Gaza as well. Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, we were hearing from John Donnison as well. Many, many people really desperate for this ceasefire to take hold and to actually begin the end to this 15-month war, 470 days of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, of Palestinian civilians being displaced, being killed in Gaza. People not just here in the Middle East, but around the world, really desperately hoping that this happens. I also want to speak to James Elder. Now, James, you have been so involved with the aid effort there in Gaza. You've been there very regularly. I know you, like Gil, have had some really emotional moments from what you've seen and heard. You, again, I know, are desperate for this ceasefire to come into effect, and that the delay will be agonizing, as we were hearing there, for people here in Israel and for people there in Gaza.
Yeah, and look, I've been on the phone ever since this started looking real, because so many of these ceasefires have not really, to put those in Gaza, felt like they were going to bring about an end to the killing, an end to the violence. The hostages going home. This one has, so since Wednesday, including this morning, and people are just desperate. They have lived on hope. But as someone said to me today, we've also absolutely lived on disappointment. So they wait, and it is long overdue. We know these hostages should have been home a long time ago. We know thousands and thousands of children did not need to be killed, 100 killed in the last, since the start of this year, Anna. So people are there, and people are saying to me, look, I live in a tent. I will go home to rubble and be in a tent, but I will remove the rubble with my hands. I think people forget, despite this insane devastation and destruction, despite an absence of empathy, an absence of respect of the rules of law, Gazans do rebuild. Gazans have one of the highest literacy rates on the planet. And that's because no matter how many crises they've had, parents and grandparents, Anna, always put education first. So these are people who are ready to rebuild, ready to restart, if given a chance. And so, as we've heard from all your guests this morning, this cannot be for a week or for a month or for 3 months. We cannot return to the idea of children being bombed in their homes and being shot by quadcopters. This needs to be sustained. But of course, you and I are speaking, and we're still waiting. But there is great hope on the ground. But it is a population that's seen their hope, literally blown away many, many times before in the last year and a bit.
And James, just remind us of the scale of the task ahead in Gaza, because of course this is a 3-phase ceasefire agreement, and the rebuilding, the reconstruction really doesn't come in until phase 3. There is so much to be done there, isn't there? From day one to actually rebuilding people's lives.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical point, Anna, that the environment that humanitarians need to operate in. So if you look at numbers, almost the entirety of the Gaza Strip has been displaced. Displaced meaning violently having to leave your home, and 2/3 of homes being destroyed. The capacity of the water system is around 25%. Most of the hospitals are not fully functioning by any stretch of the imagination. Systematic devastation of a healthcare system. We've seen diseases reappear that we hadn't seen. We've seen children dying of hypothermia, children dying of malnutrition. So for UNICEF, right, our first priorities are medicine, is fuel for things like hospitals, so doctors can operate with lights, so fuel, so we can get desalination plants going. It's tents, it's blankets, and it's food. But we don't change the operating environment in Gaza, which has been so devastatingly broken, with the stroke of a pen. We need those access points, many more access points. We've always said from day one, the most efficient, the quickest, the cheapest way to get aid to that long-suffering population is through Israel. Those entry points need to open. We need security on the ground. We need roads repaired. We need all the things we have been pleading for that sit under international humanitarian law for more than a year. Those things need to occur, and then yes, we can start to flood the Gaza Strip with aid. But when we talk of 600 trucks, which is essential, and it's commercial trucks as well, that's 1,000% increase on where we are now. And where we are now is because of these restrictions, because of security, because of a lack of entry points, because of bureaucratic obstructions. So those things have to be removed. I spoke to someone yesterday, Anna, who said, I'm happy, not happy. What do we have left? What does it mean? What is the point? We have to show there is a point to this. Gazans are ready to respond. Gazans are ready. They've been the front line for their families, for their children, for those working in hospitals, volunteering from day one. But for this aid and commercial goods to get there, we need both parties. And we particularly need Israel, who controls the entry points and controls that security, to follow the intent of this ceasefire, open everything and allow us to reach a very long-suffering people who really are, and have been for a long time, and are absolutely on their knees.
I think what's key in all of this, James, and something that I think is true to say of the conflict across the wider Middle East is that so often, these decisions that are being taken by violent armed groups, by politicians, people sitting in rooms, whoever they are, the impact is always so acutely felt on the ground, whether, as we were hearing, it is hostage families here in Israel waiting desperately for the release of their loved ones, whether it's, as you were saying, displaced Palestinians who've seen family members killed, who can't feed their children. This has such a wide impact to ordinary Israelis and Palestinians, people just trying to live their lives in peace.
No, absolutely. And I think I recall very well being in Gaza when there was a 5-day pause, 2 Novembers ago. And as the fighting started again, and during that pause, I would see children, and you would see children just start to regain a little bit of childhood. You'd see children start to play again. And then the bombs started, and you realize the bombs started because, yes, leaders who had a voice, leaders who could have made these changes didn't. And we said silence is complicity. This became a war on children. UNICEF did not say that for a headline. We said that because of the disproportionate, devastating effect of this on children in terms of numbers killed, numbers injured, and health systems and the education system. So those leaders who from day one have shown a lack of compassion, a lack of empathy, unable to see the reality on the ground of their decisions or their lack of decisions. I never thought, Anna, I would meet, a child who'd lost their entire family. I mean, grandparents, mum and dad, sisters, cousins, everyone. I've now met more than a dozen such children. So the reality is that the lack of empathy and compassion in these discussions from day one has been absolutely telling, and it's been lethal. Now we sit on the cusp of hope, and that hope has to be full of a sustained peace. This cannot be a temporary ceasefire. You cannot, in any good conscience, imagine returning to war, returning to what these families have endured. Because as your images have shown right now, that hope is boiling over in Gaza. People are imagining what it would be like, as a woman said to me, to tell my 9-year-old, tonight you go to sleep, and I promise you, you'll wake up tomorrow morning.
James Elder from UNICEF, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's 8 minutes to 9 here in the Middle East at the moment. We should be 22 minutes into a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, but as things stand, that has been delayed. We've heard from the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, who say that they are ready to put that ceasefire into effect as soon as they receive that definitive list of hostages from Hamas. Hamas putting it down to technical difficulties, but as things stand, if you're just joining us, that breaking news that ceasefire, which should have begun by now, has been delayed. We know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try and bring it back on track. I also want to speak to Dr. Saladin Sawan, who's an NHS surgeon who's been volunteering in Gaza, just returned about 3 weeks ago. Doctor, thank you for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time. We've just been reflecting on civilians there in Gaza and how desperately they need right now an end to the fighting.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm absolutely disappointed, utterly disappointed for the people of Gaza and for people across both sides who were hoping for this ceasefire to be in place 20 or so minutes ago. I agree with the speaker about the children there. I operated an hour when I was there. She actually lost her entire family, her mother, 3 sisters, and her dad was nowhere to be seen. I looked after her after I did the operation where she had holes in the bowels. She was only 15, and I really did not know how to talk about her family. She was surrounded by her aunties, but not her immediate family where we killed. Civilians got caught in the middle of it, while actually, I mean, is it real ceasefire to be delayed for the list of the names? I don't know. As an ordinary person, I feel that some people are indulgent in themselves in details why they lost this sight into what happening to those families, what happening in the ground. They really, really need to see a bit more to appreciate the suffering. The atrocities taking place did not leave people alone.
Doctor, I know, and as you're saying there, you're reflecting on people that you've helped, people that you've worked with. one of the key parts of this deal is not just to stop the fighting, but to actually get much needed aid into Gaza. And from your point of view, particularly medical equipment as well, to rebuild those hospitals, many of which have been damaged and been put out of action.
Absolutely true. I mean, when I was operating in Nasser Hospital in Gaza, I had to really the fear of the blackout of the electricity, which happened often while I was there. There was, you are in the middle of your operation and suddenly no electricity. Now I use my headlight, but the anesthetic device used electricity, and you would wait. Often the backup will kick in shortly. It took on occasions few moments. So the hospital there need everything: fuel, you need instruments, you need medicine, anesthetic, painkillers. You will need also to allow the doctors to get and nurses to help the devastated health system there. It's near entire collapse there. I would point this as well. Actually, we need journalists to get into Gaza to see for themselves, to tell what the utter devastation and destruction has taken place in Gaza, and probably to tell the world about how disappointed people there. I spoke to my colleagues who I got to know over the last few weeks, and were they really full of hope. Today, this morning, they will have some respite. They will start to go and see their places and families.
Yeah, Doctor, it's an important point that you make, that while Palestinian journalists have done an extraordinary job in covering this conflict, as you say, international journalists have been prevented from reporting inside Gaza. Doctor, thank you for joining us. In fact, I want to bring back in at that point our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Lise, we should have been reporting the beginning of this ceasefire. We know that in just the last few moments, there's been a visible explosion in Gaza. So things are not on track. Things can hopefully be brought back on track. But I think just listening and watching over the last half hour or so, you really get a sense of the devastation that's been caused and how much this means to people on both sides.
And it's a measure of this moment that as we wait for what so many in Gaza, in Israel and around the world hope will be a ceasefire about to start, that we're discussing the suffering of children, the death of children, the maiming of children in what the United Nations has described as the 21st century atrocity. A war that has been unprecedented in every way. The fifth major war of recent time between Israel and Hamas, which has seen untold suffering. And as we've been reporting, every minute longer is a minute too long. Everyone is daring to hope that these are just technical difficulties, and it does seem they are, Anna. But this war, there's this cautious hope that this war will end, and not just end for a day or for weeks, will end altogether. Because as it ends, and even when it doesn't end, there are so many other wars. The battle for Palestinians to find enough to eat in Gaza, the battle to rebuild their homes, to rebuild their schools and hospitals, and for Israelis who will welcome home their loved ones, and those who won't, they too will have the battle about how to carry on. So much is invested in this moment. If it succeeds, it could put the region on the path to a future where the forever wars like this will come to an end. But if it doesn't, it could plunge it into even greater chaos.
Lise Doucette, thank you, our chief international correspondent. As we see images coming in from the border, we see images coming in from Gaza. That breaking news this morning is that the ceasefire has not come into effect as it was supposed to, but we will continue to keep you up to date through the day here on BBC News. Stay with us.